think we should start by asking Toti if she can read an extract of her choosing, and then we'll move on to some questions I've prepared, and then we'll open the floor. Over to you, Toti.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for making your Sunday evening available. I'm gonna read one story that is 20 minutes long, that is very close to eternity. So I give you formal permission to check out and check your mail, whatever, and we'll reconvene at the end. I'm going to share the screen because you're gonna have enough of my face later, and I prefer to give you the words also to help out my permanent ESL accent. So let's see if the share screen works. It should. Can you see it?
Yes, it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the title that you don't see is Tanked. Daniel wasn't up when I heard rasping at the door, knocking lightly. That must have been what she meant, but didn't quite dare. The closed door intimidated her. She wasn't accustomed to barriers, especially not between us. I was still flesh over flesh, was I? She might have thought a doctor was in. That would have commanded a respect, a obsequiousness all things uniformed did. Maybe more than one doc, a few, and nurses as well, performing a procedure of sorts. Such a doubt would have stopped her in spite of curiosity, eventually sent her back to the hall. She would have sat on the sofa, waited like a good girl. Was she listening then for a scrap of conversation? Whispered orders to confirm her guess. A sound. Surprise, we didn't make any. I was so weak I could barely breathe, certainly couldn't exert my muscles and simultaneously vocalize. For the time being, I had given priority to motion, tension, to be exact, my entire energy concentrated in my open arms, fully extended, wrists locked, fingers clamped around Daniel's fingers, hands to be out of the way, lips, tongue, genitalia. No hands, no. Maybe later. Now I wanted him crucified on the cross of me and the other way around. We both arched like a double ball, rose and fell, every inch of our skin making contact. Besides, hands. Mute. We hadn't exchanged a word since we had met, meaning 3 facts ago. No way to tell time otherwise. Curtains were always drawn, lights always turned on, only lowered by a dimmer, and nurse shifted on occasion, not sure why. I assumed Daniel had always arrived during night time. I couldn't be sure. He was clean, his skin smooth and dry, rubber-like. The air conditioning prevented us from sweating. Its slow, constant buzz isolated us in a kind of capsule. The room was that tiny. Yes, we could have been in space, anywhere. He had no body odor, not a distinctive one. He had a hospital smell, bland and faintly sweet, sanitized, yet vaguely rotten. The same smell I exuded. I guess we could have been 2 Barbie dolls out of the same box. His head was fully shaved, a hint of regrowth pleasantly brushing my palms. Not now. Hands weren't allowed. I sighed noiselessly. Her presence outside had returned me to earth, interrupting my flight. I was cooling fast. Alas, Daniel caught my fading vibe. He slowed down, then he lay beside me on his stomach, his face niched between my shoulder and ear. I felt the whole of him, not only his penis, deflate. I hated those aborted rushes, miscarried ecstasies. Yet her present posture was the closest to tenderness we had ever shared, our fingers relaxed, still entangled, unwilling to let go. We said nothing. I waited for my mother to leave. She should have gone for good, not just to the adjacent waiting room to allow for Daniel's exit. Would she? Were we stuck? Would we be discovered? Not such eventuality troubled me. What could happen that hadn't already? Could I be punished? More. About him. If he took the risk of ignoring regulation to come frolic with a female patient, he mustn't have much to lose. I shouldn't over-worry for Daniel. How did I know his name? He hadn't spoken a word since Fact 1. You assume it was penned on his gown, do you? I never checked. He dropped the thing on a chair by the door as soon as he came in, and I couldn't have, possibly, had I wished to get up, I couldn't have. Daniel yawned, and I lost the train of my thoughts. My eyes wandered around and fell onto the crowded surface of a minuscule bedstand, the glare of my amber ring, such a cute, perfect egg, caught my gaze as if concentrating all brightness the dull, somber room contained. And I suddenly knew what mother came for, the amber. She wanted it back. She must have looked for it without finding it, suspected, then realized I had stolen it. Borrowed. Giving back the ring was the way to get rid of her. Could Dee slip into the bathroom, hide a while? I'd let mother in. I would give her the ring with due apologies, then I'd ask her to go. Should I tell Daniel? How did I learn his name? I didn't. I don't know how he calls himself. I know I have fallen on a plane, not from a plane, damn it, on it, more specifically into my seatbelt duly buckled. I remember being sick, a part of me desperately wishing for help. A doctor. Isn't there always one on board? This sure was no exception. By the way, even a nurse would do. Someone help me. I was sick like a dog. I remember, though I can feel it right now. Those states evaporate, the picture fades out, and only the caption remains. Your brain stores a few stickers, brief descriptions, adjectives such as awful, unbearable, a simile, like a dog. I remember I was vanishing, liquefying, yet strenuously trying to stay seated, hoping no one would notice my temporary, I hoped, defection. I had decided, after all, I shouldn't get aid. The sicker I was, the more paranoid I became. For some reason, terrifying scenarios accompanied my vertigo, my nausea, my cold sweat, my tremor. I shouldn't attract attention, shouldn't let them know, or I'd get in trouble. They'd send me, would lose my carry on. Should I? At that point, the subject of this frantic monologue left the stage. When I re-emerged, I didn't recall who I was. Not my name, though it mattered little. I could have dispensed with it, but I missed some general information, any kind, for operative purposes. Knowing nothing about myself made it hard to imagine a possible course of action, decide what I do next. I didn't dare moving. Luckily, I was still sat unbuckled. I knew I was in transit, sort of in between, which implied as well after and before. Yes, that much was clear. Slowly, the idea of a vehicle came forth. Getting that part right reassured me, grounded me, so to speak. Only later I puzzled out that I was in flight, an airplane. Now I had a where, not a when. I was coming back, though. I, yet unnamed but present, comrades, present, was on a plane, train transiting from an origin to a destination. When? Oh God. My vertigo promptly resumed. Many references fluttered through my brain, which felt as mushy as a pudding someone forgot to refrigerate. I mean, I saw bits and pieces of facts, but I couldn't tell which belonged to the present, didn't know which ones I should grasp, hold on to. When was I? The search was exhausting. I gave up. Meanwhile, words were on the tip of my tongue, struggling to come out in different languages. Yes, I apparently could speak more than one, and such skill seemed redundant, embarrassing. I was frightened of expressing myself in the wrong idiom, irrationally convinced my mistake would have had nasty consequences. I tried to pay attention, listen to the words others spoke. Why hadn't I yet? I saw people talking. Uniformed ladies and guys stood by a metal door, busy in conversation. Hostesses and stewards. Was it a door? It looked like a gate. My sight must be still blurred. As hard as I tried, I could not properly read those folks' lips. Wait. Then I realized they didn't make sounds. No one, nothing did. All was perfectly mute. We were fish, sealed inside an aquarium, underwater. I gasped for air. Then I screamed. I must have dozed off. I thought I was recollecting the events that led me to this place, putting them in a row for your perusal, but I have fallen asleep. For how long? Daniel is gone. No surprise, it has happened before. We have napped after sex like two cherubs. I've heard him snore gently like a cat each time. Then I have snoozed away. When I later awoke, he had left. Then he came back. I can't measure time in between. He is my watch. Now I'm all alone. I feel like a half moon, a sick sickle. I shall sleep again. Then I see her. She is sitting on a metal chair in a corner close to the curtained window, far from the bed, far from me, yet staring at me like a bird of sorrow. Could you stop, Mom? Cease being yourself? Could you? Of course, I don't ask her. She still has her coat on, neat and tied, white label, emblazoned with a camel, winter coat color of petroleum. Her hands clasp her purse, how like her. Her hands. I glance at the bedstand, a chaos of bottles, sparse tablets, empty boxes, tissues, powder and spills, even a tube of lipstick. What a mess, and yet I can tell the ember is gone. Mom, the scream scorches my throat. It hurts like spitting blood. Did she hear me? I'd like to sit, prop myself upright, but I can't. I'm furious. She stands, she looks uncertain. Her features betray anxiety then panic. Should I pity her? She's coming towards the bed with such tiny steps. Unbelievable. Why does she walk that way? She'll never make it on time. I'm dizzy. Come here, for Christ's sake. Where did you put the ring? Why did... I know it hurts. I know how much she cares. But she could have asked. Where do you go when you lose consciousness? When we sleep, we dream. We go into dream world, kind of a separate realm, yet not undecipherable. When we faint, have a seizure, fall into a coma, what's there when awareness fails us? I wish I could tell. When you fall unconscious, you don't die, don't vanish. Well, the you does, the I told you how long it took to come back on the plane. So the subject of the conversation, of the monologue, is cleared out, but something remains, quite dense, struggling, aching, laboring, sweating, trying to make it back to the surface from the very bottom where it seemingly crashed, from the gluey, muddy hole. Something, not a thing. The article is missing. Multitude, legion. Don't they call the devil that way? From hell, multitude tries to climb, crawl, creep up the abyss walls. Legion is determined, strong, frantic to become one again. I remember such effort, such desperate tenacity, such absurd optimism until all that pixelation reached my upper edge, made it to my skin pores, and I opened my eyes. Tell you the truth, I like those crumbles of being all scattered, all nameless, more than I like myself. They are so innocuous, so pure. When he first showed up, I had just returned from one such, seizure, fainting spell, whatever they are, still trembling, still marveling, contemplating the sight of those little spots swimming towards reality, starlets, fireflies of mine. Quietly, he pushed the door open when he dropped his hospital gown. He was in the row. When he lowered himself upon me, I felt refreshed, happy about that. Of course, I kept it shut. In my mind, I knew who he was. I had already named him. Daniel was a prophet. He climbed out of the pit where they had tossed him, food for lions, a penance of sorts. Who decided it, and why? Those questions never get answers. Climbing out is what fucking with Daniel feels like. Here, now. Only, I'm not sure I want to. I have stolen a bunch of her jewelry, piece by piece. I have sold it within the hour, you bet. Had to. Atrociously unfair. I know how much she cared. I know I'm unforgivable. I deserve what I got. No excuse. On the contrary. Mom, please, accept my apologies. Still, do you remember Cornelia? Don't look at me that way. Those tears in your eyes, always on the verge of spilling, yet stuck. How I wish you would cry, period, instead of giving me the lightning and thundering. Cornelia, I was saying. I don't recall details, don't recall much. I'm not even sure I liked the girl, truly. But she went out to some balcony, her kids in her arms, right and left. She said, "These are my jewels. A proud thing, maybe a rebel thing, a great sort of thing to do, Mum. You could have said nothing of the kind. Did you ever hug me? If you did, you sure weren't proud. I stole the amber last. Didn't have time to sell it. Damn, you got it back, so be it. Would you let me sleep? I can't unless you leave this room. Come back to me, Mama. The last time I saw my girl, she looked fine, well groomed and dressed up. We played all afternoon, drawing on huge multicolored sheets of construction paper. I had bought the largest pad at the dollar store and markers and scissors with rounded tips. I had stuffed a whole bag of mess inside my carry-on. Mess is ribbons, barrettes, candy, safety pins, stickers, makeup, you name it. I pulled out a golden braid, slipped it through the loop of one of the scissors, knotted it, then hung it around her neck like for a professional seamstress. Same for myself. I had found scissors with plastic handles, mine red, hers pale pink. First we drew trees, flowers, boats, houses, people, and every beast we could think about. We say a thing, we draw a thing, I had told her. She loved it. She kept singing with her little bell of a voice, the prettiest of sounds. Now we make a birdie. Now we make an elephant. Now we make a duck. First her pitch went up. Now we make. Then it remained suspended like a kite, then came down like gentle rain. Time flew. I was about to leave and we hadn't started cutting yet. Can she sense how long are my visits? All the same between two shadows. She said, "Mum, what's the most important?" I choked. My brain raced and felt mushy at the same time. Is it love? No. Believe. Believe. Faith. Come on, she isn't yet 4. Loyalty. Is it me coming no matter what, no matter where from, going to the dollar store, bringing this bag along? Isn't this the most important? Must be. Yet shouldn't this change at some point? Could it? Hope. Is it? Why are you asking, though? Because you already know? Are you testing me? Haven't I failed yet? Then something lit up. You mean, what's the most important among this? Like houses? Houses, she said. She was smiling, her fingers smeared black, tenderly caressing the contour of her drawing. Houses, flowers, eyes, faces, birds and trees, I said, still uncertain. Maybe we should just enumerate. Maybe she didn't care about the first prize. Now I did. Baby, I asked in turn, what's the most important? She pensively scratched the top of her head. Fish, she said. I sucked my cheeks, puckered my lips, making tiny, invisible bubbles, sending muted kisses her way. She laughed. So did I. Thank you.
Thank you, Toti, for that reading. It brings to mind a lot of the questions I'd thought about, and it makes me want to ask them all at once. But that's not possible. So I'll take them in some kind of order and perhaps we'll get the big picture will build up as we work through some ideas. Um, One of the things that struck me about a lot of your stories, including this one, is how they seem to be on the borderlines of consciousness. I wonder how much of that is intended for to give your reader a feeling of being in a dreamlike world, or how much of it should we read as a deliberate distortion? Are the characters in the stories distorting reality themselves?
Well, I would say that none of the characters in the story, beside maybe in one story, are ever lying. So definitely they are not distorting anything. I would say that they're all as truthful as being truthful is possible, pretty much naked and vulnerable. So no, they are not lying at all. Uh, I don't know if I certainly, there is no intention of creating a dreamlike situation. And when you mention the borders, the borderlines of consciousness, in many of these stories, the characters are in particular situation that they actually share with the reader, they enunciate, and they are special situations where uh, per se consciousness is different than what it would be in a trivial life. Some people are actually in a coma. The one in the story is not exactly, but she is in a hospital with a very serious situation. Other people just wake up from GA, or other have mental issues that they present up front. Other people are experiencing the first symptom of dementia, and they tell that to the reader as a way to invite them in a place where consciousness is a bit different than the convention we use in everyday communication.
That helps my understanding a lot. Uh, Maybe a contrasting question. Uh, some of your descriptions are very physical. Uh, as a reader, you can feel the size, the shape, the corpulence, pain of the characters you describe. Um, there's a sentence in one of your other stories where you describe a person standing as though they had a fishing line through their body. And I remember you actually said that to me many years ago when you were trying to show me how to stand up straight. Um, as you're involved in all kinds of other artwork, physical artwork, sculpture, painting, illustrating, performance, I wonder how much overlap there is between that pictorial representational work and the way you write description of people or feelings.
Well, I think there must be necessarily an interrelation because I am one person, and so whatever I do reflects that. I don't know. I suppose I don't know about the visual work. Uh, my visual work, although sometimes it is figurative, it is not mainly figurative. So I see a relationship between my visual work and my writing because I realize that I compose the pieces, and I, to myself, I call my stories or anything that I write a piece. So no matter if it is fiction, nonfiction, poetry, for me it is a piece. So it is evident that I, even to myself, I represent it like I represent a work of art. And I think I work the writing and the visual in very similar ways, like a juxtaposition of layers and elements in a mesh, in a shape, where you see a pattern, but from a different angle, you see another pattern. And if you look from close, you see something that you don't see at the distance. So that's the way I do my art, and that's the way I do my writing. I suppose there is a relationship. As for the way I write the body, I'm not aware of a particular way. I think this is most related of my lifelong activity as a dancer and musician. I suppose that the way I perceive my body at all moments as a sort of precision that might be slightly not shared by everybody if they don't use their physical being as an expressive tool and a work instrument, essentially. So I suppose that that consciousness translates into my writing.
Thank you. It was very interesting to see how you moved your hands when you were talking about the relationship between physical art and writing. It was as if you were sculpting the story. So, so that worked for me. Maybe talking a little bit about your writing style. It's very compact. You write short, impactful sentences. But at the same time, there's often a little surprise around the corner. You make interesting choices of vocabulary. Sometimes tenses are a little bit unexpected. Um, in a way, I wonder if, in some ways, you're playing games with the English language. As a non-native speaker, I also write in non-native language. I wonder if that gives you a feeling of detachment and the ability to play with the language more than perhaps a native speaker would do.
I don't think that applies at all. I think that what is unconventional in my use of English is by default, is because I am an ESL and I will be an ESL until I die. It is something that is not possible to overcome. And I think that at the best of at the top of the parabola, somebody who writes in a language which is a second or third or fourth language, and there are plenty of us. I mean, it's very diffuse. It will be fortunate and should aim to arrive at the point where there are not grammar mistakes, but accepting that there will be always a slight oddity, a slight misalignment, and hope that that misalignment become like a form of character. And so I think you're making me a compliment, telling me that you perceive it like a kind of style or character. I think that is the maximum I can aspire to. I will never write like a person who was born into the English language.
Yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make is that that's part of what makes it interesting.
Yes, I understand that, but it is not deliberate. I mean, I wouldn't say I would never admit on playing games with the language. I will never have that ability.
Okay. Um, Maybe bouncing off that theme of the compact writing, the stories, and this struck me again listening to the one you read to us. The stories seem sometimes disjointed, as though you're expecting the reader to fill the gaps. And I was while you were reading, I was thinking about what's going on that we can't see in the story. And I think that's emphasized by your frequent use of questions in the text. How much do you expect from your readers? And how much should they be contributing to the interpretation of the stories?
Well, I think that even if I use a totally different style, much more controlling and much more fulfilling, the reader would always and inevitably interpret, give his own interpretation. I don't think that the literature exists otherwise. It's always a meeting. And so, because I know that that is inevitable, I'm very thrilled about it. I'm totally thrilled by the fact that the reader will see things that out of the scene that I might have intuited, or if she can see other things that are invisible to myself too. If I can make a metaphor, I think that which is important to me. I think that I build each piece like a scene of the crime, where you have all the clues. Maybe they're all there, or hopefully they are sufficient. And then the best that we can all do is an accurate reconstruction. And I'm not sure that mine will be better than what a reader would do. And I'm really very curious and interested of what other will reconstruct.
Maybe I can push that theme a bit further to talk about character. When I was reading your book, I took some notes and I kept writing down identity theft. And that seems to be a prevalent theme in many of your stories, including in the title story. Sometimes we're inside the characters, sometimes we're outside the characters, but we're never completely sure of their identity. I wonder how much are you expecting? I guess you are expecting the readers to interpret this. How much should we draw our own conclusions about the identity of the characters? And in the title story, I was wondering if there's identity crossover between the missing baby and the narrator, for example.
Well, the title of the book is Alter Alter, which is something that an expression that doesn't exist. We're all familiar with alter ego. So by itself, the title has a story, but clearly it brings up the theme of otherness. And I think that otherness is this and identity is that. I mean, they are the same thing. You can define one without defining the other. So definitely identity, whatever it means, because it's such a huge umbrella, is at the core of many of those stories. But even if there are, especially towards the end in the latest session, there are stories, one in particular, where identity theft is actually addressed in the form of somebody who's taken away their papers. And so there, the question becomes very explicit. What is identity? Is this my passport? And when my passport is taken away with no reason, what remains of my identity? So there it is clearly addressed. But even in that story, I wouldn't talk about theft because the characters are not so certain of what their identity means. This is what they are trying to puzzle out together with the reader. So rather than theft, we speak about building and discussing and questioning what it means, my identity versus somebody else's identity and otherness.
I still have so many questions. Maybe I should just ask one more before we open the floor. And I can always come back if there's a chance to jump in. I wanted to ask you about myths and legends. I get a feeling of ancient myths from some of your stories, as if you're referring to some kind of mythology or legend, but I've never worked out what you might be referring to. Do you have a sense of that, a sense of ancient mythology, and how does it impact on your storytelling?
Yeah, I think that when I referred to ancient mythology, it was very open because I put the names of the characters: Cassandra, Narcissus, Ulysses, and towards the end there is not only towards the end. In several stories there is the Minotaur, and
Yeah.
Ariadne, there is Antigone, there is Prometeo. So there's all seem to be they all come from Greek mythology. And certainly I was an avid reader of fairy tales and myths when I was a little kid. And those first readings are those that have remained with me for my entire life. They were clearly very soon they became kind of archetype or um, figures that could be invested with all sort of interpretation, and so I keep them with me in whatever I write. Sooner or later I would refer and have a conversation with them.
Thanks for that. I sympathize. I read also a lot of mythology when I was a kid. It can have a big impact on your life.
Yeah.
Maybe we should open the floor. I can still kick in with other questions, but I don't want to deprive everyone else.
Yes, please, if you have any questions, either show me your hand and I can give you the floor to ask it, or if you want to drop it in the chat, that is also possible, and I can read it out loud for Tuti. This is your chance. Go for it. Kathabilla Wilson, please go ahead. I would like to ask you to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Yeah, Sharon had her hand up before I even pressed the raise hand. So maybe Sharon could go first?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Cody, the story that you just read sounded so real, so personal. It sounded like a memoir that I want to ask, and how real is it? And if it isn't you, then how did you come up with this very believable idea?
Well, definitely, this is probably my only ever book of fiction, so there is nothing hybrid. Many collection of prose, I do mixing fiction with memoir, or not straight memoir, but non-fiction. This, I wanted something totally fictional. So definitely, I'm not telling you my story. On another level, there is nothing I ever wrote about that I don't know inside out. So you don't have to tell your story. You only have to know the pieces, and then you compose the pieces into another story, which is fictional. I'm
I
sure
see.
knowing your poetry, I know that you know what I mean.
Mhm. Thank you.
All right. Tody, this is Cathabella.
Oh, I see you.
Okay. So I love what you read. I find it extremely honest, and honest in the sense of speaking to experience. It doesn't make it memoir, but the validity of experience is present all the way through. And it's really amazing to me how it follows that stream of honesty and vividness all the way through. And all the altered states that we all feel, like you said, we can all feel all those different states as you read there. I felt like I could identify with them and the way I felt in all different conditions. And some I haven't felt, but I can understand them as being real experience, documented minutely. And that's what I love. I mean, it's if you have a dream and that's not just dreams you're talking about and you wrote it down, it would sound similar. It would at least echo something of what you did there. And but you have to let go of trying to make it into a story in order to feel that way. And that's the way it felt to me. There was one thing that was interesting that I questioned, is that the telling of the story out loud when you're reading it is also very interesting and different from somebody just reading it in the book. And one thing I noticed that I found interesting is that in the scene where you're shouting at your mother, and you say you are, when you read it, the last tone of that was very tender and soft. So to me, it suggested a kind of ambiguity in the feelings towards the mother. And this is very common with everyone, is that kind of ambiguity, especially with people that are very close to you like that, but in general. So what do you say about that in your reading? That happened a couple of times where I noticed that discrepancy between what you were saying was happening and the way you read it.
There are a couple of notes about that. First, I think that if you focus on this particular element and look, I don't know, in a number of films, even from long ago, pay attention to how the things that are the most big and important are proffered by the actors. They are almost always whispered. When we are going to tell somebody for the first time that we love them, we don't yell. It is usually almost inaudible. So that is, I think, something that I have known for a long time, that I have observed maybe 40 years ago, and now I don't have to think about. It stay with me. But the other observation is, first of all, of course, I don't have control on how I read. That would be very artifact. So I go with the meaning and I stay in the moment and I let my tone of voice do whatever it wants to do. That in particular, in that story, among many other ambiguities, the title is tanked. And there is a theme of fish. When this woman has the episode that we don't know what kind of episode in the airplane, she suddenly cannot hear the words. And then there is interaction. The most important emotional interaction is the one she has with the daughter, who's probably her own life hope, and she might not see again. We don't know exactly. And fish is the last contact she has with the daughter. There is, and very often she says that she screamed, but people don't react like if she has screamed. So we don't know how much. All this is a kind of intense monologue. We have no idea where she is in terms of really being able to speak. So we don't know if she can scream at all. She often mentions screams, but nobody hears her and their throat is scorched. And there is this obsessive theme of being in an aquarium. Maybe she's sealed out and all that we are seeing is inside her brain. And I am glad to let the reader decide about it. Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Wonderful.
I'd like to jump in for minutes, just because I want to continue Cathabella's idea and say it was fascinating to see you read, and also not only see you read, but see you do the gestures as you were reading, as well as singing when the song came along. And that added so much to the story, so much different. So maybe I'm gonna throw a suggestion and have maybe small readings that we could record on YouTube of your stories. And so it wouldn't only be, it would be also the text, but also you moving with it. And it clarifies so much more than just reading. So
well, I don't know about that. The reason why also I wanted the screen was not only because of my accent and I wanted people to react to the words, but as much as I do love living through my stories, because as I do that, I understand more about it. I don't want the reader having my person and my image applied on top of the story, because it feels like limiting. It feels like imposing something that they are free to imagine this woman as a totally different woman, maybe their sister, maybe themselves, maybe their girlfriend. So that is why for me it's a little I'm always a little accident about having people seeing me and my face, because then it becomes more my story than their story.
I see. Thank you. Uh, Carolyn does say, that said, I adored hearing you read, Toti. Anybody would like to, we can have one more question if anybody would like to add one before we close in today's reading. Unless Christopher, you want to ask one more question.
Maybe if there's nothing else around the table, I'm intrigued to know how Totti sees the collection as a whole. Whether we should read each of the stories as an independent story, which you mentioned in your introduction, or how much of it should we see as having some kind of coherence and interaction between or amongst the stories? And maybe as a corollary to that, what determines the way the stories are organized into sections?
Well, whenever I put together a book, I organize it, because I see it like a hanging art show. You don't just pick up the pieces and put them in a row. You create a flow. And I feel the same need whenever I put a collection together. So each time I group the stories so that they create nucleuses of meaning, and then I put them in a shape that for me is like a bridge, so that the reader can go even very subliminally on a sort of a journey, start somewhere and find herself at the end somewhere else. And the stories of they are separated, they are standalones, but they were written in a what I consider a rather compact lapse of time, in about 4 to 5 years. So of course they are related in content, because they reflect those years of my life. And the way I put them together, I noticed and encouraged the fact that there are actually echoes and interrelations, and in fact a reader will be able to figure out at some point that some of the many questions that are left unanswered in some stories have actual solution, or not solution, but some kind of reply in another story. So definitely there is a connection.
Thanks. I'm really happy with that answer, because it's how I felt after reading the full book. I felt as though I'd found questions and answers in different parts of the book, and I felt as though I'd completed a journey as well.
Because you are a fantastic reader.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I would like to remind you that we do have signed copies by Toti at LSR Press. So if you order through our website, you could have one of those copies. I think we have 10 to 12 copies that are signed. And so we could send you one of those just because you've joined us today and you've been here. A lovely audience. Thank you, Toti, for being here. Christopher, for your wonderful questions. I'd like to say thank you, Linda Johnson, for joining us as well. She has been the editor and with Toti on the book. And really lovely to see you all. And I wish you a lovely rest of the day. Thank you again. And we hope to see you in more events with LSR Press. And take care. If you want to unmute and say goodbye to Toti, go for it.
Thank you. It's fabulous, Chris and Toti. So good.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, it was wonderful, Todi.
Thank
And
Thank you, Todi.
I felt your art all the way through as well, through that what you read.
Thank you. Thank you,
I
everyone.
understand your art better through your story.
Thank
Good.
Nice. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, Toti.
Bye,
Bye
Pat.
bye.
Bye and bye.